Hello there, it's Mike Yao again. With Savage Kingdoms role-playing games and Fire in the Head Productions, my little production company. Thought I would do part 2 of the Monsters and Creatures of Savage Kingdoms 3 video. So here we go. I did promise a part 2 from the first one, and almost wasn't going to do it because I thought I covered most everything, but I really didn't. So here we go. And have an hour or so to fill today before other stuff and gigs and work and stuff. So let's try it, right? So last time on part 1, I went through kind of 5 basic sort of things. Just to recap really quick. One was, what is a monster? And that's all been covered. I'm just getting some flow here. Getting the flow. This is my warm-up. Number 2, animals and gigantic animals. Number 3, supernatural creatures, dragons, gorgons, fae, giants, etc. And then number 4 was NPC templates. Those are basically just your NPC stat blocks. I call them templates. I like to call them templates because those are just your basic stats. I mean, obviously not every Thraki raider is going to have exactly those stats. That'd be kind of boring, right? And not probably very challenging to your players. Not every priest of Agathon is going to have the same. So I like to call them templates. Right. And I kind of briefly went over that human foes should be more common in Savage Kingdoms than non-human foes, but that's up to the game master. But in general, that's how the world is sort of built. It's a little more human-centric, and that way, when your players do encounter other creatures, particularly otherworldly monsters, it's more of a big deal instead of, oh my god, it's encounter number 4 for the day, and it's another supernatural thing. That just gets a little boring. There's also a less sense of wonder about the setting. But you do you. But that's just a little piece of advice. And then number 5 was GMing monsters, game mastering monsters, kind of how to run them. And I kind of cut off right there because the video is running pretty long, and that gives me some fodder for what we're here right now for part 2. Right, part 2 of Monsters and Creatures of Savage Kingdoms 3. So again, this can apply to Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, whatever. But this is more specifically Savage Kingdoms 3. And in this video, part 2, it's even more so Savage Kingdoms 3 because I'm about to go over some of the abilities, some of the powers, some of the talents and maneuvers and that sort of thing, attacks and challenges that various creatures of the SK3 core rulebook can present and beyond. Okay, so the first thing I like to cover is challenge level. So when you look at a monster stat block or an NPC template, you'll see everything has a challenge level. Slightly contentious thing with me. I almost was not going to do that. I might have said this in other videos, but when I did the first edition like 6 years ago, I wasn't going to do them because one of my design goals, and it's still there, was to present monsters and creatures and challenges in more of an open sort of thing instead of worrying so much about level and challenge levels and challenge ratings, all that stuff. I do see the merit of that, obviously, having been doing this for a long time. However, when a tabletop role-playing game gets designed, it should try to offer some slightly new approach, right? I mean, for the most part, everything's kind of been done, right? However, as a designer, you should find little ways to tweak things, find little things to make your setting and your rule system just a little different, offer something a little different than what everybody else is, or most everyone else is. Put a little spin on something here and there. I think some designers try to like overcompensate and like try to do a whole new thing. Doesn't always connect, although it's kudos for doing that. And then on the other hand, there's some designers that I'm just going to just do Dungeons and Dragons again and say, well, what's the point? So my point is to find, take that generic thing that you're going to do and just put some spins on it. Do some research, inspire yourself through movies and books and other media, or just, God forbid, an hour's meditation or a thought out in nature. All these things will come to you. It's a proven fact that the color green actually increases creativity by 30%. It's apparently a scientific thing now, meaning that when you're out in nature. So anyway, there's ways to inspire yourself to create, as a game designer, different types of games, but also as an adventure writer, or just a game master in general, because you're always writing, even if you're improvising. You're still right. All this stuff is still coming out and being presented. So that's still being written in a sense. Yeah, so just inspire yourself with all that stuff. All right, enough of that little tangent. So challenge level, what I was getting at is I wasn't going to do challenge levels or challenge ratings like D&D and most other games do. However, I ended up at kind of the very, as an afterthought, doing it, and they're pretty loose. I think I even say it in the books, particularly in the SK3 Choral book. It's pretty loosey goosey. It's just meant to give you some idea as a game master. This creature is challenge level 6, and these are 0 advancement characters. That seems that's like panic mode almost, right? But no, it's not, because challenge level is different than, what is it, CR? Challenge rating in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, for example, which I also run too, so I kind of know that game as well. And there's an SK version of it as well. So, um, challenge rating in D&D 5th edition, and most of you, all 4 of you watching this probably know this already, is based on a party of 4, I believe. So a challenge rating 1 creature in D&D is equal to 4 first level adventurers. In general, it doesn't always work that way. In fact, it often doesn't. But that's kind of a general way of kind of seeing power level. A CR10 creature in D&D against first or second level characters is almost a complete blowout. However, that can still happen, because I think people always think in combat terms. Think in other terms. How are you going to sneak around the creature or the NPC? Can you negotiate with them? Can you just hide from them and wait for them to leave? There's so many other ways to tackle such an encounter. And I know this is another little semi-tangent, but it is related to challenge level and challenge rating. So now in Savage Kingdoms, CL or challenge level is not done in that way. And some people, I think they do. They look and go, "Oh my God, you put us against a CL8 creature, but somehow we won." It's like, well, because it's not rated like D&D. It's actually a little more forgiving. So the way it happens in, I'm going to see if I can remember without looking it up in the book, but I do have the book right here. I based it on, so a 0 advancement player character is basically challenge level 3. So something, say, like a domestic cat is like challenge level half. I think it might even be 1, because they can get kind of vicious, right? I think a wolf is like 1.5, 1, maybe 2. I think it may be 2 actually, for example. So then you get to a beginning character, 0 advancement, is CL3. So every 2 advancements above 0 for a player character is another challenge level. So that's how the CL system works. So for example, if you are a 5 advancement player character, you would be considered challenge level 5, right? Really 5.5, 5.5. So you yourself, and this in my system, Savage Kingdoms, it goes by the individual character, not like a group of 4. So a CL6 monster is basically equal to a CL 5.5 or 6 player character, for example. In general, again, these are generalizations. Nobody knows. This is all white room stuff, theories. Um, there's so many factors. Did you surprise the creature? Did the creature surprise you? Are you better equipped for melee and less so for ranged? And this creature's more susceptible to ranged attacks or to magic, or maybe, yeah. So there's a million different things. So that's just kind of a general thing. So having that said, now you know how CL works. That's where I'm coming from. For example, I have the book open right here. A Minotaur is a CL5 Gorgon. Gorgon is the type of creature it is. It is a Gorgon, a twisted mutant between with different animal parts and sometimes human parts. So CL5. So a Minotaur is equal to a player character that's had 4 or 5 advancements. In general, again, straight on, who knows? So the cool thing about this system, I think, and I kind of came up really on the fly in maybe like 10 minutes time, kind of weird, um, is that well, in Savage Kingdom in general, it's not as quite as level based as D&D, and that was a design goal. That's why I call them advancements. I don't even call them levels. The word level is used in skills, skill level. So whenever you hear the word level in SK3, unless people are using it incorrectly, they're actually referring to skill level. The term levels not used anywhere else and throughout the game system, except for challenge level. So so the idea was that in SK3, and particularly with monster scaling, is that it doesn't matter quite as much. Actually, probably not nearly as much as D&D. D&D 5th edition has made it a little easier where like you can a third level character can travel with a fifth level character and kind of more or less hold his or her own, and might even be able to deal with some of the more powerful creatures, and vice versa. But that's even more so in SK3. So if you have a fourth advancement character traveling with sixth, seventh advancement characters, sometimes even eight, they can pretty much kind of hold their own. I mean, it's not uh, particularly because at SK3, when you do advance, when you do gain a level, and again, that's technically not the term, an advancement, you don't gain quite as much stuff. Say in D&D, you get 5 skill points, you get 3 or 2 talent points. Every other advancement, your one of your attributes goes up by one of your choice, and you get +1 to your luck, and every other advancement you get +1 to renown, and that's pretty much it. You don't get like these like some massive class feature plus possibly a feat plus possibly 2 more spells, stuff like that. I'm not knocking it. I love D&D 5th edition actually, but my point is that the scaling isn't quite um, as ridiculously varied, and that was by design. So keeping that in mind when you're game mastering monsters and creatures in SK and Savage Kingdoms, particularly Savage Kingdoms 3 or any edition, don't worry so much as a game master if you're pitting your either by a random encounter roll or by your own choice. Don't worry too much if it's like, oh my god, this creature CL8 and they're just beginning adventurers, particularly if there are multiple characters. It's a bigger deal if it's CL8 versus say 2 0 advanced player characters. That probably can be really deadly. Again, they should probably think about avoiding the creature altogether or NPC. There's always that instead of directly attacking it. But action economy is a big thing. A lot of game designers know about it, or people who play tabletop games. You hear this term all the time, action economy, and it is a big thing, meaning that 2 player characters per round of combat, they get basically well, in SK3 they get 4 actions, but only 2 of those will be attack actions. Whereas a party of 5 would get 5 attack actions or 10 total actions, possibly before the creature even gets to react if it gets low in the initiative order. So yeah, action economy is a big thing. So, or to put it in more narrative terms, safety in numbers. More swords, more spears are just like in real life are a bigger, better thing than 1 or 2 swords or spears that goes against a creature. So action economy is more of a gamist term, but anyway, that's really what that is referring to, narratively speaking. All right, moving on from challenge levels. I think I beat that dead horse enough. Here's some creature abilities that will pop up in SK3. Some kind of cool things to think about. First of all, fear factor is what I call it. Fear factor. Trying to be clever and probably failing. So fear factor meaning that it's a note to remind me that a lot of creatures, not a lot, but a fair amount of creatures in SK3, more so than say D&D, have a aura of fear or something similar. It might be called something different just to be fancy in the stat block, but it's generally the same thing. There's a few things that are different. For example, the Shadow Wraith on page 365 of the core rulebook. It's a CL5 undead. It has despairing aura. Now, some creatures have a fear aura, but this one is despairing. They call it an aura of despair, which is despair is pretty bad in the despaired condition is pretty bad in this game system. It can really shut down a player character. You're just completely unmanned. In fact, I almost called the condition that, but it seemed a little like I don't know, sexist for for today's society. Although it's not, but that's kind of the implication. So despaired, cowering, it can cause stuff like that. But most creatures do this have this fear aura, and you have to, if you get within 5 yards of it, 7 yards, 10 yards, whatever it says, depending on how powerful and scary the creature is. Player characters and their any sidekicks, obviously NPC sidekicks, kicks and creatures. Remember, animals, mounts that they might be riding, etc., would have to succeed in a resolve roll against a difficulty level DL listed in the stat block. A lot of these, I'd say the average difficulty level is probably 13, which is fairly challenging, but not ridiculous. If they fail the resolve roll, they usually in most of the creature stat blocks they get intimidation. They're intimidated. That's -2 to your die rolls and your defense until you can overcome intimidation. How do you overcome intimidation, you might ask? Well, in D&D 5th edition, you generally get a saving throw as they call it, every round to overthrow it. SK is a little harsher because it is a grittier game. Uh, Typically, to overcome intimidation, you have to you have to wound the creature and see that it's mortal, or you have to be adjacent to someone that causes obvious damage to it. So, uh, it's kind of like, I hate to say it's like being in a fight because nobody like really likes that, but if you're in a scuffle with someone and you're kind of intimidated by them, but then suddenly you land this blow, you're like, yeah, man, that's right, what's up? Suddenly you're no longer intimidated. I don't know why I'm doing it like this, whatever. So suddenly you're not as intimidated. So that's what that represents, right? All right. Now, some creatures do a greater thing. They can cause terrified. That's the next level of fear above intimidation, is terrified, being terrified. Uh, so terrified, similar to the frightened condition in D&D 5th edition, causes you to flee. You want to run as fast as you can, or the direct way to get the furthest away from the creature. When you're out of sight or sound of it, because some creatures are loud and scary from their visual, like a dragon's roar, then the terror wears off, and the terrified condition, and player character can do whatever. You can come back to the fight, or just stay away from it, which might be the smartest thing. So yeah, and then the next level of fear is cowering, cowering, right? Which I almost called unmanned. Like I said, to be unmanned, meaning you're cowering, you're in a ball, you're done, you're over it. It'd be like equivalent being like in shock on the battlefield, and say like a modern setting or something like that. But so yeah, so creatures can cause that. So be aware of a fear aura that certain creatures have, more so than probably other RPGs, except for maybe some of the really darkest, like horror-based ones. So, all right, next thing, poison and disease. Some creatures cause poison and disease. Poison probably being the most common of the two. Reason I lump them together is they're both opposed by endurance. You would make an endurance roll to resist, or at least, uh, well, yeah, either resist the poison entirely or to resist it somewhat. So a lot of creatures that have poison are kind of obvious. So like a giant scorpion, even just a regular scorpion, giant spider, a gigantic spider, even a regular spider. Um, Snakes, giant viper. All those stats are in the core rule book, and there'll be other monsters coming out in the Savage East when I finally get done with it. So yeah, so poison, and then there's some creatures that are not as obvious with poison. I think a wyvern has a poisonous tail, although I think in D&D it does too, so that's not a big shocker. Um, yeah, or a manticora. A manticora has a scorpion tail, and that's poisonous. So, so yeah, so there are some creatures that cause poison damage that aren't quite as obvious. Some creatures cause disease, like I mentioned. A little bit rarer, but for example, zombies can do that. Let me look at this zombie stat block right quick. So here's our zombie. Actually, it's not him. That's a Eridonian Knight NPC stat block, I believe. But where's the zombie? There we go. Just wanted to show you the book a little bit. Zombie. So they have a special ability called Plagueborn. It reads, some zombies are carriers of disease, and any living creature damaged by such a zombie must succeed in a DL12 endurance roll or gain the diseased condition. About 1 in 3 zombies are Plagueborn. So basically, that's just kind of a way of showing the GM that can be like, cool, I can make my zombies a little different. So, say 6 zombies attack, 2 of them are plague-borne. They can cause disease if you want to. You can roll if you want, or you can just assume the average 1 out of 3. Or you can have them all plague-borne, or have none of them plague-borne. Then there's a variant to zombies, such as the Draugr. The Draugr are a more northern, it's almost like ice zombies, so to speak. They're not made of ice; they're just kind of from frigid areas, and the fire causes more damage to them. All right, so disease. What else would have disease that's in this book? I know in Savage East there'll be a demon actually called a plague demon that has really bad disease abilities, as in bad as in powerful. All right, I don't see any right off the bat, but just know that's a possible ability that might be in some of the creature's abilities. So, well, to piggyback on that, there are some creatures that will choose to use poison. They don't have a natural venom attack, but they use manufactured poison, such as goblins or goblins. Sometimes they'll smear low to medium grade poisons on their arrows, or even on their daggers or short swords or spears. So there are creatures that might choose to use poison. Some barbarian tribes might use natural poisons. Some more civilized peoples might use more like alchemical poisons, so more refined. Yeah, and even then, and that's usually more like in the courtroom, like political intrigue, not much as much on the battlefield. All right, so the next ability would be held slash grappled. So some creatures can hold you or grapple you to the point like a giant serpent or a sea serpent or a giant viper can literally grapple you, or a giant constrictor snake can hold you um, to where it's hard to break out. Generally, the only way you can break out is beating it with an opposed brawling roll, or you can use acrobatics to slither out. So I used to put slither when I was thinking about a snake in my head. Appropriate. So yeah, acrobatics to kind of like contort your way out, or brawling to like Conan your way out. All right. What's some examples of being held? Like a giant ape can do that. It's not in the book. I'm just kind of throwing that out there. There's a frost giant. That's not like necessarily a special ability of them, but they're so big and they're brawling as +12 that if one chose to grapple most player characters, you're kind of done unless you're really, really strong or really, really acrobatic. Yeah. So those are some possibilities right there. Um, yeah, held and grappled. So the next thing, kind of the next little special monster ability, which is sort of has to do with held and grappled, which is why I put it next. It's called swallowed. So some creatures can swallow you. The reason I say it's related to held grappled, sometimes you already have to be grabbed and grappled by the creature and then swallowed by it. But there are a few things that don't have like arms or tentacles that just literally bite that could swallow you right off the bat without technically holding you or grappling you. However, when you're in the creature's mouth, you are still considered grappled in a sense, or held, or immobile. There is a condition called immobile. And certain creatures, if you survive the bite, it allows, and the rules even write it out. For example, an ice worm. You can try to cut your way out if you can live through the being suffocating in there. And some creatures have an acidic gullet that do like acid damage every so often. So yeah, so note that there are some creatures that could swallow you and kill you that way, but there is a heroic possibility that you could carve your way out, which would be really cool. I remember like D&D a long time ago. This has actually happened a couple times, but one thing that sticks in my memory from 30 years ago was somebody being swallowed by a purple worm, which is like this massive, almost like a sandworm, but it's purple and it's not necessarily in the desert. Uh, could swallow you, and this guy cut. He was playing a paladin or something. He cut himself out, and had like one hit point left, and it was this heroic moment. Cut himself out of the worm, and then just the process of cutting out, he basically killed it because he did enough damage to it. But anyway, that's a side note. Right. The next monster ability I'd like to talk about is knocked prone or down. Knocked prone slash down. Okay. Knocked prone or knocked down. So some creatures are so big, and player characters with cool maneuvers can knock you prone, right? Or if you score a critical success in combat, that's the possibility, is that not only did you do damage, but you might have knocked the person flat. Happens in battle. Uh, in fact, you want to bear your opponent to the ground if you want. It's a lot more difficult to defend yourself when you're laying on the ground. Probably obvious, but so that's what all this stuff is kind of representing. So certain creatures are big enough to like just knock people flat. Like even a bull, like when it stampedes, it can knock people over. Mammoths definitely can have a trampling charge ability that's really nasty because they're really big. So they can knock people down or prone or down. So the more common one is to be knocked prone, just to be knocked flat exactly where you are, but being knocked down um, yeah, or knocked back is what I'm trying to say. There's also an ability called knockback. So you could not only be knocked down, prone, but you could also be knocked back. Sometimes it's like a yard, but some creatures can knock you up to like 2 or 3 yards away. In fact, the frost giant, which I happen to have these stats open right here, has an ability called knockdown blow. If a frost giant scores a successful attack on an opponent, the creature is automatically knocked prone if its physique is +5 or less. If physique +0 or less, then the target is often knocked back 1 yard. This occurs even after armor absorbs all damage. Great. So they can knock you down anyway. Just knock you flat on your butt. That's right. And there's other creatures that do that too, like I mentioned, mammoths, even a bull, a lot of other stuff. But just be aware, some creatures have that cool ability, and as a GM, don't forget it. It's all pretty well listed though in the stats here. All right, next ability is Rending Teeth / Claws. There's several creatures, particularly red caps and trolls, which are in the SK3 bestiary in the core rulebook, have an ability called either Rending Teeth or Claws, something to that effect. So rending or ripping suggest armor piercing. So that's how it's handled game mechanically. For example, red caps have armor piercing 2 with their claws because they have these like iron like long claws, and they're known to just kind of shred through armor. And the way that's represented is just additional armor piercing. So don't forget in the stat block it may say maximum damage 15 or whatever, and then /AP2, which means armor piercing 2, and that's just a fancy term for 2 additional points of damage. Some people have asked, well, what if you don't have armor? Is there armor piercing? Well, of course there is. Your flesh and your bone is still technically armor, right? So just the fact that you don't have armor on doesn't mean that the claw is not going to hit is great. But I mean, it's a legitimate question. But if you really think about it, it's kind of silly. But so yeah, so basically, armor piercing 2 is 2 additional points of damage. Armor piercing 3 is 3 additional points of damage, which is kind of cool. So if the creature hits right on your defense for technically 0 damage, then it would still do 2 if it was AP2, or 3 if it was AP3, etc. Right. So Rending Teeth. And then going further on that, trolls have an ability. It's kind of like red caps. They can, I think it's with their bite, so their claws, they just bite and just like rip into stuff. And that's armor piercing 2, I think also. But they have a side of thing of they score, I think it's 5 over the opponent's defense, or every 5 they score over the opponent's defense, it ruins 1 point of armor. So in this case, actual body armor would matter. So if you're wearing, say, a chain shirt, which typically average quality is armor rating 3, is 3 points of protection, and a troll bites you, scores 10 over what it needs on your defense, so not only are you going to take that 10 points of damage, but you're going to lose 2 points of armor. For its 5 over your defense, it would be 5 points of damage, and you lose 1 point armor. Loses in its temporary, it's ripped away. So that armor is either ruined, or you could try to get it fixed by a smith, or try it yourself when you have the time, or just buy a whole new suit of mail, or loot another armor. You know, there's ways of acquiring armor in the game, obviously. So, all right, the last one I'm going to cover before ending this video is life drain, or things similar to that. It's not always called life drain because sometimes it works a little different from different creatures. But life drain is kind of the generic term for creatures such as wraiths, particular. And there's 3 types of known wraiths in Savage Kingdoms. It's the ice wraith, the shadow wraith, and the wood wraith. They can like drain energy. I think Ghost can try to do that too. But anyway, energy drain in Savage Kingdom is handled probably a little different than D. No, I think D&D does a little different now too. Anyway, so it will do actual damage to yourself at the moment, but it typically drains vigor. So if your vigor gets to -5, you are dead, and I think that's kind of an overlooked thing. And I think I've overlooked it once as well, running my own game. So yeah, so if you're playing a -3 vigor character that has a vigor of -3, that's obviously way below average. And you get hit by one of these creatures, and it succeeds by even 2. Like if it drains 2 points of vigor, you're doomed. And what that means cinematically or narratively is that it's literally drained all of your life out of you. Typically, they are empowered by that, while you are not as powered because you're dead, or at least you're bad off, right? So even if you survive it, say you get drained out of -4 vigor, you're alive, but you're obviously much weaker. Your health is lowered because vigor figures into your health stat. Yeah, other things that are affected by vigor, such as endurance, skill, and magical arts, life and death, obviously would be affected as well. So that's how life drain's handled, and I think that might be a good way. In fact, the Shadow Wraith ability is called Draining Touch, but it is a form of life drain. Here, I'll just read it really quick before I end. Draining, just to let you know what this means. Draining Touch. A Shadow Wraith can drain stamina from any living creature it touches, meaning that the creature must make a DL 17, pretty tough, endurance roll, or lose 1 point of stamina per point of fatigue. I'm glad I read it because this one's actually different. So instead of draining stamina, the Draining Touch, I guess that's why I call it Draining Touch instead of Life Drain, drains stamina instead. So 1 point of stamina per point of failure. So if you roll, say, for example, a 10 and you need a 17, that's 7 points of stamina you got drained from you. which can cause fatigue and exhaustion. A critical failure means that the target also takes 5 points of cold-based health damage as well. So just so you know, you've been warned. Been warned. That's right. All right, I think that's it. Video's at 30 minutes. It's pretty good. It kind of wrapped up the little series, so to speak, of the Monsters and Creatures of Savage Kingdoms 3rd edition. Also can apply to other tabletop role-playing games, but particularly SK3. So thanks for following along. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, and share, and all that stuff about YouTube things. And I'll talk to you guys again soon.